Anosmia is the clinical term that describes the complete loss of sense of smell. And what we really are bringing attention to is the loss of function, but not only the loss of function, but the loss of pleasure and all these other very intimate moments that disappear when the sense of smell vanishes. Part of our program is to raise awareness and to really make people realize that this is indeed a problem. What are the patient care goals of our program? Well, today we want to talk a little bit about what patients perceive to be the problem, because they not only lose their sense of smell, they also lose their sense of taste. And so they ask, how can I lose both my sense of smell and my taste? And they want to know, what's the cause of my smell and taste problem? More importantly, they want to know, am I likely to recover? And how can I cope with this loss? And finally, when they come to you as a physician, they really want to know, what can you do to help me? So these are some of the issues that we're going to discuss today. We want to, as we said, increase awareness and knowledge about the frequency and causes of anosmia and the lack of treatments, and increase awareness really of the new research that's being done at the Monell Chemosensory Institute and also here at Jefferson to find better treatments. So let me introduce the folks on the panel briefly. I'm Edmund Pribitkin here at Jefferson and studying smell for over 20 years with my clinical colleague Beverly Cowart Dr. Cowart from the Monell Chemosensory Institute. Dr. Meera Vinjamuri, also a researcher at the Monell Chemosensory Institute, and Dr. Zhao with us as well today from Monell. So, are there really that many people that suffer from a loss of smell and taste, Beverly?
Actually not, and mainly because there are not very many people who actually lose their taste. What happens is that although at the periphery, smell and gustation are completely different physiological systems, they both respond to chemical stimuli in the oral cavity. And there is, in the brain, considerable overlap in the cortical areas they project to. And most notably, there's a lot of secondary smell projections to the primary gustatory cortex. And probably as a result of that, all flavor sensations tend to be interpreted by people as coming from their mouth, and so they think they've lost their taste. So this is just a little schematic showing orthonasal smell and retronasal smell. On the other hand, a lot of people lose their smell, either partially or completely. There have been estimated to be 6 million people who suffer from complete anosmia and millions more from partial loss or hyposmia, with the most common causes being ongoing nasal sinus disease, prior upper respiratory infection, and that can just be a regular common cold, can produce a long-term smell loss, and closed head injuries.
Well, Beverly, we understand then that it's a problem, and we do see patients come through the office that talk about their smell loss. Can you tell us a little bit then about how does the sense of smell work?
So the primary olfactory neuroepithelium is located fairly high in the nasal cavity, primarily around the superior turbinate, although there is some neural tissue that extends down to the superior portion of the middle turbinate. This neuroepithelium is composed of millions of olfactory receptor neurons, which are actually primary brain neurons, except that the cell bodies are out of the brain. They're vulnerable for a couple of reasons. One is that each of these neurons extends the ciliated dendrite into the nasal cavity, and that's where the smell receptors are located. So you've actually got nerve cells interacting directly with the environment, which is a very unusual situation. And as a result, they're vulnerable to damage from all the junk that we breathe in and out. In addition, they each extend an axon that connects directly to the olfactory bulb in the brain, but to get there, it has to go through the cribriform plate, which, as I'm sure most of you are aware, is kind of like a honeycomb. But because of that positioning of these fine neural fibers in that bone, when there is head injury, the coup contra coup forces can crush or sever those nerves, and that can also cause smell loss. Now, the one sort of positive thing about the olfactory system, which Meera will be talking about more, is that these neurons are also unusual in that they regenerate throughout the lifespan. And within the neural epithelium, you'll see various stages of growth and degeneration, starting with a basal cell that can commit at some point to either becoming a new olfactory neuron or a supporting cell. Cells that are committed to become neurons but haven't quite made their dendrite and axonal connections, mature cells, and dying cells. And as I said, that process seems to go on throughout the life cycle, but it's never perfect, and it probably becomes much less efficient with age.
So, it's really an amazing system because you really have primary neurons that are essentially first-order neurons that are exposed to the environment. And because of that, you have these dangers that can occur to those neurons, and you have neuroolfactory loss. But, when someone comes into the office and they're just basically saying, I can't smell things anymore, how do we quantify that? How should the primary care physician or the otolaryngologist really establish that they have lost their sense of smell, Beverly?
So the two primary measures that are used clinically are odor identification and or threshold assessment, which is just simply measuring the minimum detectable concentration of some substance. In most clinical practice, what makes sense, obviously, is some commercially available form of these kinds of tests. The two probably best known are the smell identification test, marketed by Sensonics, and the Burkhardt Sniffing Sticks, which is used extensively in Europe, marketed by Medisense. However, these can be relatively expensive for a clinician, particularly if he's not testing a whole lot of patients. And there is now another option, a relatively new alternative, which is an odor identification test that was actually developed by Monell scientists and other scientists for the NIH toolbox. So this is available through NIH. The actual cards with the odors on them are available through a company called Prenascent. For as little, an order as small as 100, which will last a couple of years actually, you can get these for $4 a test. And they have a number of advantages. One, they've been normed down to 3 years of age. And we can do this with 3-year-olds because you have the option not of giving word options saying what it is, but just pointing to the correct source of the smell. And these are the various items that are used for identification.
It's wonderful that kids still recognize the smell of Play-Doh. I think that's something that everybody remembers from their childhood. Beverly hasn't mentioned it, but the truth is that this child version of the smell identification test was actually begun here at Jefferson and Monell in conjunction with our partners at Nemours DuPont, where we actually published one of the first verified testing solutions in terms of really looking at children and showing that, yes, they can be tested down to the age of 3 in order to really establish whether or not they have or haven't lost their sense of smell. It's fortunate that the adult versions are different from the child versions, not something that we want to necessarily give 3-year-olds coffee and cigarettes, but something that perhaps they are exposed to as well, unfortunately.